Soto Azua, 21 years old, was intentionally struck by a car, not once, but twice. The driver then fled the scene. It was a coldly calculated accident. A murderer who remained a fugitive for 6 months, protected by his own parents. And this killer was no stranger to her. What truly happened on that fateful night? Cerimar Soto Azua was born on October 13, 1995, in the city of Torreon, in the state of Coahuila, Mexico. She was the youngest of 5 siblings. According to her family, her arrival came at a particularly difficult and tense time for them all. The family was navigating complicated, stressful situations, and Cerimar's birth was a kind of emotional relief. Her arrival brought a wave of joy and hope that spread throughout their home. She was not just a blessing. She helped restore family relationships that had frayed over time. Cerimar's presence reunited family members who had grown distant. From a young age, Cerimar was a deeply creative child with a charming personality that shone with spontaneity and joy. One of her greatest loves was music. She adored singing and dancing, and at home, she could often be found performing songs with infectious enthusiasm and energy. She had 2 idols she admired profoundly, Selena Quintanilla and Belinda. She would often dress like them, imitate their moves, and sing their songs with such passion that it astonished everyone who saw her. In fact, her impersonations were so good that her parents decided to enter her in several local talent shows when she was still a girl. Thanks to her charisma, creativity, and skill at imitating these artists, Cerimar won several of those competitions. At 17, Cerimar experienced a moment that would define the rest of her life. She became a mother. The child's father was her teenage boyfriend, with whom she'd been in a relationship since she was 14. The two were deeply in love, and after Cerimar's 15th birthday party, they made the impulsive decision to run away together. Despite her family's many attempts to convince her to return home, she refused again and again, determined to follow her own path. However, 2 months after the birth of her son, their relationship began to fall apart. The new responsibilities of being parents at such a young age became too much to bear. In time, they realized the relationship wasn't working as they had hoped, and they made the difficult decision to separate. Despite the breakup, the child's father never abandoned his responsibilities and always showed interest in his son. After the separation, Cerimar decided to return to her family's home with her young son. Although the process was emotionally difficult and she was deeply saddened, her family welcomed her with open arms and gave her their full support. They understood her situation and committed to helping her move forward. One of her first goals was to resume her high school studies, which she had left unfinished due to her pregnancy. With the help of her mother, who cared for the child during her classes, she was able to return to school. Once she finished high school, she decided to pursue one of her passions: the world of hairstyling and beauty. Since she was a teenager, Cerimar had shown a strong interest in this field. She had taken several informal courses in nail application, makeup, and hairstyling. She always found immense joy in these activities, not only for personal satisfaction, but also because she loved helping other people feel better about themselves. So when she was finally able to formally enroll in a styling and beauty program, she was profoundly happy. A year after separating from her son's father, Cerimar's life took a new turn. It was then that she met another man, a young man named Jorge Alejandro. Jorge was 3 years older than her, and like Cerimar, he also had a daughter from a previous relationship. By then, he was completely separated from his daughter's mother. So when he began a relationship with Cerimar, he was free of any romantic commitments. From the beginning, Cerimar spoke very highly of Jorge to her family. She told them he was an extremely responsible man, especially with his daughter. He always made sure to see her often, never neglected their bond, and took care of all her needs, both emotional and financial. This protective and committed attitude was something that deeply impressed Cerimar, and she conveyed it with enthusiasm to her loved ones. Over time, Jorge Alejandro gradually got to know Cerimar's family. When he finally met them, he made a very positive impression. Everyone agreed he was a charming man. He was always very polite, attentive, and treated every member of the family with kindness and respect. Furthermore, his attitude toward Cerimar was especially affectionate. He treated her with tenderness and care, and it was clear that he respected her deeply. The image he projected brought the entire family a sense of peace and joy about the relationship. They sincerely believed that Cerimar had found a good person, someone stable and committed, which filled them with hope. This good impression was further reinforced by the fact that Jorge, in addition to being affectionate and polite, continued to be an exemplary father. His responsibility toward his daughter was something everyone greatly valued. According to Cerimar's siblings, like any couple, she and Jorge had their arguments and disagreements, but nothing out of the ordinary. They always reconciled quickly, and there were no signs of excessive jealousy, much less violence. At all times, the relationship appeared stable, healthy, and based on respect. Although he presented himself to Cerimar's family as a kind, polite, and seemingly loving man, Jorge Alejandro Ugarte Hernandez was, in reality, a toxic emotional manipulator. According to close friends of Cerimar, whenever she did something that didn't align with his wishes, Jorge would immediately punish her with hurtful words and a cold, cruel demeanor. One of his most frequent tactics was to take off her engagement ring, throw it on the ground, or even hurl it in her face, accompanied by threats to cancel the wedding. He knew perfectly well that getting married was Cerimar's greatest dream, and he used that very dream to make her feel small, guilty, and submissive. In Jorge's hands, the ring, a symbol of love and commitment, became a weapon of control. Every argument became an excuse to humiliate her emotionally, to attack her most vulnerable points, her fear of abandonment, of failure, of losing what she longed for most. Jorge made her believe time and again that everything was her fault, that if only she were more docile, more compliant, then he would love her again as he had before. This constant manipulation caused Cerimar to slowly lose her self-confidence, living in a state of anxiety, fear, and emotional dependency as he pushed her further toward the abyss each day. In August of 2016, Cerimar and Jorge decided to take the next step in their relationship. They officially announced they were getting married. The news was met with immense joy by the entire family. The excitement grew even more knowing that Cerimar, who had dreamed of a large, elegant, and very special wedding since she was a little girl, would now have the chance to make that dream a reality. Jorge shared the same desire, and they both agreed to take the time needed to plan the event just as they imagined it. So, they set the date for August 9th, 2017. Giving themselves a full year to organize the wedding of their dreams. On January 27, 2017, Cerimar and Jorge made plans to attend a gathering with friends. It was a social event that promised to last late into the night, so Cerimar, thinking ahead, decided to ask her older sister for a favor. She asked if her sister could watch her son for the night, and her sister gladly agreed to help. At 6:28 in the morning on January 28, 2017, Cerimar's older sister received a phone call that left her in a state of shock. On the other end of the line were Jorge Alejandro's parents. In an agitated voice, they informed her that there had been a traffic accident involving Cerimar, and that her condition was critical. The news was sudden and bewildering. As soon as she hung up, Cerimar's sister rushed to the hospital where her sister had been taken. She arrived at the medical center at 7 o'clock sharp and found Jorge's parents there. What struck her immediately was Jorge's absence. When she asked about him, his parents avoided answering directly, which she found very strange. The doctors explained that they had been unable to perform any significant medical interventions on Cerimar because, at the time of her admission, they did not have authorization from a direct relative. The only thing they had done so far was try to stabilize her vital signs. However, precious time had been lost. According to hospital records, Cerimar had been admitted between 3:30 and 4 o'clock in the morning. This meant that at least 3 hours had passed before her sister was notified, which severely impacted her chances of recovery and, as the doctors would later explain, would leave her with irreversible damage. The initial medical report was alarming. Cerimar had multiple fractures, including severe injuries to her skull, shoulder blade, several ribs, her tibia, and her fibula. But what most caught the attention of the medical staff was that these types of injuries were not consistent with those normally seen in a conventional traffic accident. In fact, the wounds more closely resembled those of someone who had been run over. As she tried to understand what had really happened, Cerimar's sister remained concerned about Jorge's complete absence. She asked his parents about him again, but once more they avoided giving her clear or precise answers. Faced with this situation, and feeling she couldn't fully trust what was happening, the sister made the decision to transfer Cerimar to another hospital, one where the family felt safer and knew the medical staff. Once at the new hospital, doctors began to intervene urgently. They intubated Cerimar and proceeded with the necessary surgeries. However, they made it clear to the family that many crucial hours had already been lost, and this put not only her recovery but also her life at risk. The chances were minimal. While all this was happening, a close friend of Cerimar's arrived at the hospital. This friend had been at the gathering the night before and, upon seeing the sister, decided to tell her what had truly happened. What she revealed was devastating. It had not been a traffic accident as they had initially been told. The truth was, after a heated argument, Jorge had intentionally run Cerimar over with his car. Cerimar's friend recounted that they had both attended a gathering with other people that night. Everything was normal until the end of the evening. As guests began to leave, she noticed a tense situation. She clearly saw Cerimar and Jorge begin to argue. Although she couldn't hear the exact words or understand the cause of the conflict, the scene was obvious enough to worry her. What she did perceive clearly was that Cerimar refused to get into Jorge's car. Seeing her in that situation, the friend decided to approach to see what was wrong. Cerimar agreed to leave with her, and they began walking down the street together. As they walked, Cerimar mentioned that she knew what Jorge was like, that he always reacted impulsively, but that he would surely, like other times, get over it. Despite what had happened, she tried to downplay the conflict. Together, they decided to look for a taxi to leave on their own without having to rely on Jorge. However, as they made their way down the street, the unthinkable happened. Jorge appeared driving his car and steered it directly toward them. The friend managed to jump out of the way just in time, but Cerimar was struck head-on. She fell to the ground, severely injured. Instead of stopping, Jorge turned the car around, returned to the spot, and ran her over a second time. This second impact was even more brutal. The subsequent medical report indicated that Cerimar's body was thrown approximately 100 meters, a testament to the force of the impact. It was also estimated that the vehicle was traveling at a speed between 140 and 180 kilometers per hour. After the attack, Jorge lost control of the car and crashed into a nearby business. He got out of the car on his own and called his parents. They were the first to arrive at the scene. When they got there, they reported that an accident had occurred and helped Jorge flee. Later, they tried to convince Cerimar's friend to give the same statement they would, that it had all been a simple accident. But she flatly refused. She was not willing to lie nor to cover up the truth of what she had witnessed. Shortly after recounting what had really happened, the friend began to receive threats from Jorge's family. Despite this, she affirmed that she was not afraid. Her only goal was to see justice done for Cerimar, and for the truth to come to light. Meanwhile, Cerimar remained in the hospital, fighting for her life. Her condition showed no improvement. Day after day, the prognoses grew more and more bleak. On February 3, 2017, doctors confirmed she had suffered brain death. Finally, on February 4th, she passed away. After Cerimar's death, other close friends began to speak out, people who, until then, had not come forward publicly. Several of them agreed on the same troubling description of Jorge's character. They identified him as a jealous, controlling, and manipulative man. According to their testimonies, Jorge had been physically violent with Cerimar on multiple occasions. Some friends claimed to have seen with their own eyes the marks of his abuse, bruises on different parts of her body. In addition to the physical violence, they also recalled episodes of verbal abuse. At several gatherings, they had heard Jorge insult Cerimar without any hesitation. One of the most painful aspects of the abuse was the constant psychological damage he inflicted, especially in relation to the wedding. Cerimar was filled with excitement for her wedding, but for Jorge, it was merely a tool of control. During their arguments, he would declare the wedding was off, tear the engagement ring from her finger and hurl it at her. Friends and family noticed the ring she wore was battered and misshapen, a silent testament to his cruelty. Every time they argued, every time Cerimar did something that displeased him, the pattern repeated. He would threaten to cancel the wedding, a calculated form of emotional punishment, knowing just how much it meant to her. To Cerimar's family, however, Jorge presented a completely different face. They never witnessed any hint of his violent temper. In their presence, he was the picture of a perfect gentleman, polite, kind, and respectful. They would only later understand that this was a carefully constructed facade. His goal was to win their trust, and to do that, he had to hide his true nature from them. Armed with this information, the Coahuila State Prosecutor's Office formally began the search for Jorge. But he was already gone. He had vanished, and for 6 long months he remained a fugitive. It was then that Cerimar's sister took matters into her own hands. She created a Facebook page dedicated to the case, sharing Jorge's photograph and the details of his crime, pleading for any information that could lead to his capture. Her efforts on social media sparked a crucial breakthrough. A private message arrived on the page from an anonymous source. The person explained they had seen one of the shared posts and recognized Jorge immediately. They had known him for a few months, had seen him on several occasions, and even provided an address where they believed he was hiding. The informant refused to reveal their identity, fearing reprisal, but made it clear they were coming forward in the name of justice. Upon receiving the anonymous tip, Cerimar's sister acted without hesitation. She took screenshots of the entire conversation and presented them as evidence to the prosecutor's office. With this concrete and precise information, authorities were able to relaunch their search with renewed intensity, this time following a real lead. Finally, on August 9, 2017, a date that, under different circumstances, would have been Cerimar and Jorge's wedding day, he was located, arrested, and brought before the court. Instead of celebrating a marriage, he faced the beginning of his legal downfall. On August 16th of that same year, Jorge was formally charged with intentional homicide. The case then entered a prolonged judicial phase with more than a year passing before a sentence was handed down. Jorge's defense team employed numerous strategies to obstruct the process. They filed appeals, raised constant objections, and did everything in their power to drag out the trial. But despite these attempts to delay justice, the trial concluded in November of 2020. The court delivered its verdict. Jorge was sentenced to 46 years and 3 months in prison. But even then, he refused to surrender. In June of 2019, he filed an appeal aiming for his immediate release. His defense insisted that the entire incident had been a tragic traffic accident, arguing that he had fled the scene in a state of shock and fear. However, the evidence presented at trial painted a very different picture. Eyewitness testimonies, a conclusive medical report, the nature of Cerimar's injuries, the vehicle's speed, and the documented history of violence all worked together to completely dismantle his version of events. The court swiftly rejected his appeal, and the original sentence was upheld in its entirety. Today, Cerimar's son lives with her family. They are the ones raising him now, surrounding him with love and doing everything possible to provide a stable, secure life in the shadow of his mother's immense absence. When Cerimar first met Jorge and agreed to marry him, she could never have imagined that the man she considered the love of her life would ultimately be her killer. To this day, the exact reason for their argument that night remains a mystery. Jorge has never offered any details, and the only other person who knew the truth, Cerimar, can no longer tell her story. The one thing that is clear is that Jorge was a jealous, controlling, and possessive man who reacted with rage whenever Cerimar failed to submit to his will. What warning signs do you believe should never be ignored in a relationship? What are your thoughts on the role that friends and family played in this story? And how do you think we can better educate young people about healthy relationships from an early age? We want to hear your opinion. Let us know in the comments. Subtitles by the Amara.org community.